Hello everybody, welcome to Interview with the Masters. Today we have Rey Bustos. Rey Bustos is on the human body and he teaches analytical figure drawing in CGMA. CGMA is open for registration, so anybody interested, please check it out. Highly recommended. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Rey.
Hello everybody, Ray here. So if you have any questions or anything, I have some images I could share with you, but pretty much anything goes. There we go. We'll have fun, and I could draw. I have images, just pretty much anything anatomically based. Even with animals, there's a lot of cross section. So don't think that there's anything I won't try to answer. And if I don't know the answer, I will certainly tell you that. So yeah, and we'll have a fabulous hour together, and hopefully you'll learn from me.
Sounds good.
And as we wait, I'm going to just kind of go through some of the images. Some of them are from my students. So you can see homework assignments. This is my drawing. I love backs. Well, I love arms too. Okay, so I also like hands. So basically anything I'm going to enjoy, as long as, it's on a person, on an animal. These are from cadavers. So that's one of the privileges I've had in the last few years, has been able to go to UCLA and draw from cadavers. Little crochet feet. The other thing I have for you guys is I have images like this one from my Imaginatomy class. And these are also fabulous because my students have to make up an animal, and usually they've had me for anatomy beforehand, and sometimes not. So I have to basically kind of go over certain anatomical, I think, just basically information, because it crosses over really nicely. And you have, I also have a book list, because a lot of times people ask me about certain books to recommend. So I like this last one, Rey Bustos, Rey's Anatomy. That's a good one. But all kidding aside, there's a whole bunch of really fabulous books, and mine is just kind of like a supplementary type book. And some of these are just like the best ones. I don't know if there's any anatomy book I don't have. So to have such a small list is really saying something about the books that I do have on here. And I'll let this kind of sit on the screen for a little bit, because that way either you guys have this recorded or a screenshot of it or whatever you need to do, or look to see if there's any of the books that you already have might be on here. After not, you could ask me and think, well, what's with this book and why isn't it on the list? And I could usually tell you 1 or 2 or 8 reasons why it might not be. And it just depends. Sometimes it's just accuracy. Sometimes the illustrations just aren't real clear, or that they might be confusing for my students or whatever. I try to always think of it as through the eyes of the student, not me, because I could discern right from wrong because I know this stuff pretty well, but students can't. So certain books are kind of confusing and they're hard to figure out.
What is a good book to start with from this list?
You know what? It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I'm looking at this one right here, Valerie Winslow. That one's fabulous. It's as you can see, fairly new. And what I mean by new is like 2009 to me is a new book, because anatomy books have been made for centuries. But Valerie is a fellow Art Center alumni. And even though she was never my teacher, we kind of crossed over. We had the same teachers oftentimes. So a lot of the stuff in her book is so well put together. It's just one of the best anatomy books I've ever seen. I was actually kind of jealous of seeing it. It was published by Watson Guptill, and the imagery, everything is very, very kind of basic, but at the same time it's great for old pros such as myself. And it also makes for really great reference when I make copies for my students. So I would say Valerie's book here is just a fabulous one to own, to have. Some of these are pretty common, and some of them people might not even have heard of, like the Delavier books here by Frederick Delavier. They're actually health and fitness books, but the illustrations that he himself did, he's a personal trainer, but he's also an amazing artist. And the books I could vouch for. The illustrations are incredibly well done. And they're all action poses because it's people working out. And sometimes it's these guys are really huge, you know. And the other thing I like about the second book that he has a few, but these are the two I recommend to my students. There's one right here, Women's Strength Training Anatomy. It's one of the rare books where from cover to cover it's all just women and the anatomy of women, and also the physiology of women. So it's all sorts of interesting things that you don't think about very often in figure drawing, like cellulite and what the differences in the fat pad distribution on women. And it's all incredibly important because we're dealing with surface anatomy. So even though I teach about muscles and bones, when you think about it, a person's not just muscle and bones. It's how much fat they have on their bodies and the distribution, whether you're male or female, or all sorts of variables that make us all incredibly unique from one another.
Mm-hmm.
I'll bounce around with a few more imagery that I have for you. These are from UCLA Cadaver Lab. I take my students every term, and it's just a lot of fun to introduce them to the body. And it is hands-on. Literally, we get our gloves on, our surgical gloves on, and our smocks, and me and the doctor take out specimens from the cold room. And I don't want to call it freezer because it's not really that cold. It's like a refrigerated room, and take out specimens and put them on tables. And my students are always fascinated. They almost like have to be asked to leave at the end because they just don't want to go. And if you're wondering if it's something that you would be able to do, well, if you were in my class, we don't do it until the end of the semester so that you guys have a lot of anatomical knowledge. And by then, once you know what you're looking at, then your brain kind of accepts what it's looking at, and you don't turn green. Like a lot of times people think they're going to turn green when I mention it at the beginning of the semester, but by the end of the semester, everybody's really, waiting to go there, and they love it.
Wow, that's very awesome.
Yeah, it's really fabulous. This one's kind of neat because it's got like the homework from one of my students of the back, and then my drawing of the back, because it is my favorite area of the body to draw. I love backs, and it may be because I had such trouble understanding it when I was in Bern Hogarth's class, when I was at Art Center years and years ago when I was a young lad, and the back was just almost, it's like learning a whole other language. It might as well have been Sanskrit or something, It's very confusing. But now it's like, it's so interesting that it seems so easy to me now. And I understand all the lumps and bumps. But when you don't, then it ends up looking like lumps and bumps when you don't put the lumps and bumps in the right spot.
Mm-hmm. What would you say was your greatest challenge with the back for helping you understand it? Like, what was the toughest part of the back?
Well, the toughest part about the back is the fact that it's layered. Now, for any of you that know a lot of anatomy, you know that the front is layered also. But the difference between the front and the back is the front torso muscles. Like you could picture this in your head right now. Like you're looking through a magazine, you're waiting for the dentist to drill into your face, And you open up a magazine, and it's got like this page that has like a Calvin Klein model, a guy, right? And they're usually like 21 years old, and they're incredibly fit. I mean, you know, Calvin Klein, they're not going to have like your Uncle Joe, you know, after he mows the lawn on there. So it's these incredibly fit people. Takes off the shirt, and you see everything. Like, you understand it. You don't need a fancy anatomy guy to tell you, oh, pectoralis, you know, the pectorals, pectoralis major. You may not even know those names, but you get the pec muscles. You get the abs, the six-pack muscles, the obliques. It's like, it's so highly recognizable. But what you may not realize is that the front is actually very complicated because there's many layers. But what makes it easier for us artists is that it's the top layer that we see. The underlying layers don't pop through. It's very rare for anything else to pop through except for that top layer. Conversely, the back is so complicated that what makes it complicated is that if you could picture, like right now I'm looking at my Photoshop, right? And you could have like multiple layers. Let's say you have like 8 layers, you know, to this one illustration. And you could kind of go back and forth. And all of a sudden the layers, the deep layers come forward, this and that. That's what the back is. With every breath the model takes, with every movement, with every different pose, muscles like an orchestra come back and forth, back and forth. The deepest muscles could be the most visible on a back pose. Whereas the front, the top layer is always the top layer. That's it. That's all you see. Now, let me just tell you about what makes that good and bad. The front is easy to understand. When I do the lecture on the front muscles, it's pretty straightforward. Everybody kind of gets it, right? But when you draw it, if you draw it a little bit incorrectly, even a novice person will say there's something wrong with that front view, right? Now, the other thing that happens is when you're drawing the back, so few people know what's going on in the back. If you just make really good forms, people that don't know the back say, wow, you're a genius. That's fabulous. I look at it, and it's all jumbled. Okay, because the back is not recognizable, but you get away with a lot more. The front is recognizable, so you have to really hit it spot on.
I see.
Okay, so the back was always challenging because of those layers. Sometimes the sacrospinalis muscles, which are right at the base of your vertebral column, those are the ones that pop out the most when you arch your back and you reach up for the sky, and all of a sudden you just see 2 big, huge columns that go from the lower back all the way up your back to your neck. And it's like, man, that's all you see. You won't see latissimus dorsi as clearly. You won't see any of these other muscles that are laying on top. But then the model will move a little bit, and all of a sudden there's this whole shift of muscles, and there's this whole dance going on with these forms back there. So that's what makes the back so challenging. It's not 1 or 2 things. It's the fact that it's highly variable with every single pose and with every movement. And even when the model takes a breath, muscles go in and out, whereas the front just stays the front constantly.
Interesting. Got it.
It is interesting. It's all this is like, it's just fascinating to me. And, you know, what might be simple in one way is challenging in another, and what's recognizable to most makes it harder for you to render that out and make it look convincing.
Right.
So it's almost like a bad ellipse. You know, you draw a car and it's kind of 3/4 view. If your ellipses are all funky, even somebody who doesn't know about ellipses, you know, there's something wrong with those tires.
Right.
Do you see what I mean? So there's kind of like this natural knowledge that people have that they don't realize. They don't have to be artists. They just recognize there's something funky with that face, or that hand looks wrong. You know, but somebody like me, or somebody like an artist that's been doing this a long time can understand why that face is not quite right, or that hand is not right. You know, when the head turns, oftentimes when I teach head drawing, my novice students, you know, before you really get a handle on it, when you turn the head, when the model turns the head and you're trying to draw that, everything is rotating at a different rate. You know, the eyes are staying kind of put, and then the nose is rotating. Before you know it, you have like a Picasso drawing, and you didn't mean for it to be. So everything has its challenges. You have to rotate things according to what, you know, the laws of nature give you. So, you know, there's a center line. The center line is the border between the left side and the right side. So you have to see it as much as you see a contour. It's like the new contour of one hemisphere of the back or the front. Got it?
Mm-hmm. Got it. We have another question. Why are hands so hard to get right, even if you have the reference right in front? This person's still having...
Yeah, that's a great question, and the reason is it's almost like mass hysteria. You know what happens when, you know, all of a sudden everybody kind of goes in one direction. What happens is from the time we're little, and bear me out because this is like, if you think about it, it's true. Everybody says, oh, hands are so hard. What happens is you get that kind of collective knowledge that it's like, well, hands are just hard, I guess. But if you just see it as an object, it's amazing how much easier a hand or foot that's coming towards you can be. So a lot of times what happens is this. I'm going to just draw something for you. And what it is just an arcade. Make sure I can see that. It's just an arcade. Okay, so what the heck is that? Well, what that is actually like I can do something like this. Or I could do something like this. I could do something like this, and I could do something like that. And believe it or not, there's a hand in there. You see, it's coming towards you. Okay, and then I could do this, and I could do this, and I could do this, and I could do this. Okay, so it may not look like much, but it's a very simplified way of me faking my brain out into doing something that's like, you know, seemingly is going to be really hard. That's like a hand coming towards you, like that. Now, when I do feet, it's kind of like the same thing. Just kind of simplify it to the point where you're almost like drawing nothing. It's almost like you're a child again. But once you put like the toes in there and a little bit of foreshortening, then you end up with something that kind of looks like maybe something like this.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean? And then that's kind of like a foot coming towards you like this. You see what I mean? So what you need to do is just basically kind of think of a hand as just like the body of the hand, and then each finger can be just its own separate little thing. Like this. Now the pinky finger has kind of like the disadvantage. It's not only shorter, but it stair steps down. I don't know if you could see that, but this stair steps down, which is it's a really interesting thing that a lot of times people don't think about. But it already starts kind of lower, and then this is two sections right in here. So what I want you to do is actually think of a hand that's wearing a glove, but the glove is basically just like fingerless. So this is the body, and then these are the finger holes. Then you start with that and see what you can create with that. You know, so all of a sudden maybe you have like a finger coming out like this, another one out like this, another one like this, and another one like this, and all of a sudden you have this kind of dynamic thing. See, what happens is a lot of this looks totally abstract, because if you really think of this as an object, it doesn't look quite right. But you're not looking at an object. You're actually using like this, almost like a magic trick, where you're doing these really abstract shapes that look like little bananas. But that's what your hand is doing. So it's hard for your brain to do shapes that go against what your brain is saying a finger is. That's why a lot of times, here's what we think of as like a thigh. This is just an example, right? And then there's like the rest of the leg and the foot, right? So we think of the thigh as being this, right? But the model is actually having his knee toward, like he's sitting down. Let's say the model is sitting down. So your brain is still seeing this. The model is actually sitting, so what your brain does is it kind of like splits the difference and shows you this. and then there's the foot like this. Okay, so that's somebody sitting down. But what I'm actually seeing is this. And the reason it's hard for the brain to see this is because this is such an abstract shape that your brain is still telling you thigh, so it's showing you more of this, but it also knows it's not this. So the brain splits a difference and gives you this. But this is the reality. So it's the same thing with a hand. See, when we're kids, we draw like mom and dad, and they kind of like do this kind of a thing. And the feet are always off to the side. And then they do this, and then they do this. Okay? You agree? Yeah, I mean, some of you may still draw like this. But, you know that there's always better up ahead. The reason is these are all symbols that we're born with. We see the world like this, so everybody's face is facing forward. You won't see kids doing this. You just won't. It's just not something that kids do naturally. They're not going to do this. They just can't. That's not the way they see the world. This is something that you have to learn from just like sheer number of drawings that you've done and somebody training you. You see what I mean? You won't see this. But you will see this with a kid. Now, I'm going to explain why hands are hard. See, then if it's an animal, then it's side view. They won't be coming at you. So what we do as people is we make signs that look like this. Like, let's say there's like, a little animal crossing like this. So it's a side view of the animal, because if it was coming at you, you'd be looking across the road saying, what am I looking for, because I can't tell what that shape is. So what we do is we always use symbols. This is a symbol of a deer or a horse or something that's crossing the road, correct? But people are always drawn like this. So because you started off with thinking hands are like this, it's hard for your brain to see anything other than that. So this is hard for kids to see. This is hard for kids to see. But believe it or not, you don't outgrow it very easily. You have to retrain your brain to see the abstracted hand, so that you could have fingers that look kind of like they're curled up like this when they're coming towards you. See? And the nail will also tell you something about perspective. See, this, just the nail by itself, is perspective. You see that? So these are all just symbols. That's why hands get a little tricky.
Somebody's asking, why is it that we do that? Is it just human nature?
It is. It's what I said about, like, and this is the little hand I made with Super Sculpey. It is human nature. Human nature is what I described, and that is we see the world like this. See that, everybody? We're basically imprinted with information. Okay? So we see the world a certain way because we're looking at people face on. You don't really see profiles. You don't think of your mom or your dad in profile. Think of them as looking straight on. So everything's a symbol, and that is why feet are almost always like the whole Egyptian thing. Feet are drawn like this by kids because this is a symbol of a foot. If you drew this, they'll look at you like, what are you drawing? Or if you have like a pants like this, and then you have like this little muffin thing, and that's like my symbol of a foot coming towards you. Now, this is the way I would draw it, but a kid would say, no, that this is what a foot is. And they could be looking right at your feet and still see this because their brain is saying foot. And their eyes are just being really tricked. And guess what? You don't outgrow it. So that's why, you have to almost retrain your eyes to like look at that hand and then see the abstracted forms, and you'll get better instantly. I do this every time in my classes. When you're forced to see something in a different way, instead of your brain saying hand, and all of a sudden you can't draw it. First of all, you've been told hands are really hard, and you can't do them, and you have to have books about just drawing hands, and all of a sudden that reinforces the fact that this is hard, and all it is just another object. with a whole bunch of objects attached to it. Like a hand is made up of sections. The other thing that you need to know, and this is kind of a neat thing, and I want you guys to look at your own hands when you're looking at this, is see this hand I'm drawing over this foot. Okay? This is very typical. Males, when you look at their hands, the ring finger is longer than the index finger. Longer. And the index finger is a little shorter. But it's the other way around with females. Females, usually the index finger is longer than their ring finger. So how do you know that? Well, it's just from sheer number of times of looking at people's hands or whatever. It's like we start getting this kind of general knowledge of people. And these are things that are learned. You just do not come out of the womb knowing all this stuff. So just like you might be learning something from me now, it's that you're going to continue to keep learning stuff. And you have to keep looking at things a certain way so that you educate yourself. When you look at the model, really think of what you're looking at, not just what it is, like, oh, that's a thigh, that's a knee, that's a foot, because your brain is already telling you that, and it's trying to simplify that symbol, and it throws you off, and then all of a sudden you have a hard time drawing hands because you're not really looking at each section of each hand and each section of each finger of each hand and which direction they're going, because that's when you look at the hands done by the old masters and feet, they're very cool because they're not copying, they're actually creating their own feet that make the whole pose look better.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any suggestions for seeing three-dimensional form in complex organic objects, such as the human form?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
If you can if you can elaborate on that, because they want.
Well, I'm gonna draw something for you that's so simple. You're gonna say, why is he doing that? You know, we're not little kids. But I remember, you know, years and years ago, we had a visiting artist in our second grade class, and he did something like this, and it's just like I couldn't believe it. It's like, wow, that looks like a cup. You know what I mean? Because usually what happens is we're born with imprints. Now, at a certain point, now I'm trying to draw like the 7-year-old Rey. So this is the way I was drawing. You know, now this goes back to what I was just talking about. Your brain actually knows that that cup is a circle, but when you look at it, somebody will tell you, well, it's actually an oval. Now, I'm not going to use the word ellipse because you don't use that word with little kids. You just say an oval because it's easier for them to understand. Lines are also very important to us because we all recognize that that tells a person stop. You know, it's almost like a period. You're writing something and then there's a period. It just tells you stop. So, but the difference is with a period, you have to be taught that. That's a symbol that we created. But lines are things we're born with. We understand lines, just like we understand connecting dots. I've oftentimes asked, you know, what do you see? You know, you could ask a 4-year-old, what do you see? And they'll say a circle because their brain is connecting dots. What people usually do when they're little is they do this. So they finish the cup with a flat bottom. So what this particular person is taught us is, I'm trying to see if I can get a little bit of color in here, color into our lives. So what we have is, what he told me in the class is if you draw through something, it makes what you do see better. So oftentimes what I notice with my students is that they draw the side of the body, and this is something that we talk about with the CGMA class that Ron lectures and I teach. You know, they're drawing like the side of one part of the body and then the other side and stuff. Gee, I'm trying to actually draw it incorrectly, but it's not always easy. And I know that sounds kind of annoying, but it is. What happens is, this doesn't jive with that. See, it's like offset. This one's lower and this one's higher, and it shouldn't. You know why? Because it's almost like, well, you're drawing this part of the cup, and then you're drawing the other part of the cup, and somehow they don't really they miss a little bit. They're like off registration because you don't draw one side of the cup then the other. So what I try to tell my students to do is look at the body, the nude body, as if they're wearing a belt. And this is the direction of their hips, for instance. This is like the pelvic area. Now, all of us know that oftentimes we call the torso the trunk, and then our arms and legs the limbs. So we're like a tree, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple little spots here, and I'm going to break this pot because I'm going to put the tree trunk on here. But I'm going to put as if there was a break in this pot right over here, like a shard was broken off. Then what happens is when I put the trunk in here, and that's your torso, it lays nicely on this belt. And then this part down here is where your abdominal muscles fit through. But what I'm also going to do is just kind of like draw through a lot of these things. So here's the belly button. Then, for instance, the rib cage is here and the rib cage is there. And a lot of times what we forget is the way we learn this, we forget when we're drawing this. So if we draw through things, and I'm going to tell you something that is really illuminating, because a long time ago, I really fell in love with looking at drawings by the old masters. But when I was a kid, I didn't know that that's what they were called. I didn't know why. I didn't know anything except these drawings are really very, very well done. There's something that innately we just can tell when something is really very, very good. Okay? So I search for the right words to explain to my students why is that drawing so good. And it finally came to me, whether it's a drawing or a painting. I'm not using sculpture right now because they're 3D. But what makes a really great painting is when you look at the front of it, you believe that there's a back to that front. And when you look at the back of something like a body, you believe that there's a front to that. And the reason is because that artist is going to the back, from the front to the back, and there's a symmetry about it. And it feels as if you're doing this. So you're not just doing one side then the other. You're actually looking to see what's on, like for instance, here's like a little peanut shape, okay? And I'm going to put like a center line to it, right? Okay, but over here I'm going to put a scapula. And I'm going to go across the other side and put the other scapula, because what I'm doing is I'm using a little bit of perspective. So this is a scapula in perspective, because that's another illusion, right? This rod over here is the same size as this one, just this one is tilted. This one is not. Okay, so this is the same thing. This is in perspective. So all of a sudden we have liftoff. We have a head over here, we have trapezius over here, and everything starts fitting just like a glove. Over here, this compression, but I'm drawing through things. So if there's a rib cage here, then I draw as if I can see through that. And before you know it, it actually starts, even when you make stuff up, it starts looking better. And this is just a quick little nothing drawing that you guys could do right now. But it makes it easier for me to know where things are. Okay, where would the belt line be? It would be like that if I could see through the body, right? And then here's the little butt cheek, and here's like where the leg would come out. It would go out like this, and the other, you know, whatever you want to do, but you draw through things, draw through, draw through. You're going to find that in like the dynamic sketching classes, they'll have you draw through things because it makes it easier for you to find what the other thing is. It's almost like when you're a kid and you're drawing like a box. Remember this gem? I was so proud when I came home and showed my parents this. You know, that kind of a thing? Well, it's the same thing. Well, if it works for this little cube, then it's going to help you when you're drawing something more complex like a body. But try to remember the basics before you get to the complex, because just because it's complex doesn't mean this won't work any longer. Does that help? I hope it does.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And even like to finish this off, see this edge here? If you're throwing light on that. I know I'm getting off like into perspective now. But see, that little edge over there is kind of creating this little light. So all of a sudden, it's like the shadow actually makes sense also. So this edge is making that edge. This edge equals this edge. See, it's parallel because light is actually being blocked by this. And see, the bottom line is this. Watch. So if I put the same lighting over here, then this thing sticks out, so it's going to create shadow here. This is rounding, 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 rounding. So you'll see a little bit of shadow here and a little bit of shadow there. So you could even make up lighting by just using real basic forms like this. Do you see what I'm doing? And then the light is going beyond this and casting a shadow somewhere else on the wall or whatever. Do you see what I'm trying to show you? It's like, I just want you to go back to basics because it's amazing how these basics will help you with something more complex.
Mm-hmm.
Pare it down to its mere essence, and all of a sudden you'll see that it all works. And it makes life a lot easier, and your brain will thank you as well, because a lot of times your brain's like, oh no, we're gonna draw a person again, you know, and almost wants to check out, and it just becomes like this big struggle. Now, if you kind of fake it out and say, no, I'm just going to draw a belt line, because the belt line goes right across the anterior superior iliac spines of the pelvis, you know, the bumps on the front of your body, where on me, my belt line goes right across there. Okay. Then there's like a relative position between the belly button and these guys. And it's October, so if any of you are in the United States, this is the baseball field. The baseball diamond is from the belly button to the anterior superior iliac spines of your pelvis, and home base is your pubic bone, like that. How do you like them apples? The genitals are in this area right here, which I'll just put like a little box because it could be both male or female. And then if you go straight up like this, watch, you'll hit the nipples. And if I take a line through the nipple from the belly button, you'll hit the shoulder. Like that. Do you see I'm just building this little person? It goes like this, like this, like this, and it goes right above that little spot right there. Sorry for all the overlapping lines. And then your great trochanters or your femur are way out here. And these are the kinds of things I teach you in the CGMA class. So I'm hoping to get a few more people. But, you know, we have a pretty full house already. So if not this time, you know, sign up next time if it gets full. But it's this kind of stuff that we have fun with each and every week. I'm going to put shading on this because we can. These are forms that go in and out. So there's a donut here. See that little donut? And that's like around your belly button. So all of a sudden, everything should make sense, because what puts shadow, light and shadow on a donut will also do that on this little figure. Do you see that? You take a deep breath and your rib cage kind of shows. If you have the six-pack muscles, then they're going to have little shadows underneath them. And where the nipples are, if you go to the pit of the neck and make an arc, then there's the serratus anterior muscles. Okay, let me see if there's any more questions.
Yeah, to follow up on that one from the same person. Okay, but you have to know what those forms in the body are before you can indicate them by drawing through. So how do you learn how those forms would appear from the vantage point you're drawing?
And that's a really good question. So what I would have you do is keep it to what I call meridians of like a globe, or for instance, like the belt line I just told you about. The belt line is at my belt line. See, that one's an easy one because, you know, we have a belt line. We have pants. And the pants go right across the anterior superior iliac spines, which are these. Do you see where I'm drawing? Right in here. They just are. So what you need to do is look for obvious things before you get to the more complex. This just happens to be the belt line. And then there's another belt line that goes across your pubic area. And these are easy because I'm telling you, if you have a nude model and you can't find the genitals, then you have like other issues. But what you have is you have something that's really obvious, right? It's like, and I'm being facetious, but it's like it's that simple. There's another belt line that goes through the genitals and it gets the beginning of your what you see on your femur. and that's your leg bone right here. It goes right across. It's another belt line. See that belt line right there? Now, you have to see where these spots are, and it just doesn't take any kind of special training. And where's the belly button? Does that take any kind of special training? So you look for the obvious. Then where's the relative position? I'm going to get to a cleaner page here. Hold on. Don't go anywhere. All right. Watch. Here is, well, I'm going to just draw a circle. Okay, I'm going to keep it really simple. I'm going to put like a center line, and it hits a chin. Okay, so now it's like I'm telling you that this is a skull, and it's rotating like this. Okay, so that's somebody that's kind of like, it's going to be really simplistic, but this is my little person. All right, there we go. All right, now I'm going to take this and multiply it by 1.5. Okay, so I'm going to take this to my magic little copier. So I'm going to just take this copier over here, open it up, and, put my image on there. Okay, and what you end up with is a little space over here, a little shape that's 1.5 times bigger, right? That's the thorax. I'm going to put a t-shirt opening on this person, and I'm going to put a little sternum here. This is the rib cage opening, like this. This is stuff that you could start doing right now. Then from over here, you put these little triangle areas, and that's basically like your shoulder area. Okay, this is just very simplified, but it'll get the point across. Just before the pit of your stomach, right above it, is where I'm going to put the nipples. I'm going to put a nipple there, a nipple there. Now, these are actually kind of like things that you want to just look at the person, and from the pit of their neck, let me see if I could, I can't switch over. Usually I could switch over. What I want you to see is from the pit of the neck to the nipples, oftentimes it's like a right angle. But you have to look at that person because sometimes it's not a right angle. It's more obtuse, like that. And then what you do is you go down to where the belly button is. So this is what I call the kite. I'm going to see if I could actually change that color, damn it. I want to add a little color to this little drawing. So see this red area in here? That is what I call the kite of the figure. Okay, the kite is belly button to the nipple to the shoulder, right in here. Okay, then watch. I'm going to just do this. Now you can make this up too. You could actually turn it around and watch this. For instance, this is like a kite, but it's twisting. Now, all of a sudden, it's like you could see that this particular person is twisting quite a bit because there's the kite and then there's the ball field. Okay, these are landmarks that are easy to find. Here's the pubic bone, so you know the genitals are here. Here, this is something you have to just start learning to see where that is, and it's right across the belt line. So if I really had to, I could put like Superman underwear on this guy. Okay, do you see the little Superman underwear? Because that, obviously the genitals are tucked in the underwear, but they give you like holes for the leg. Okay, so now all of a sudden you have like the beginnings of something. The 10th rib, or your rib cage, is above the belly button, and it's also where the bend of your elbow is without any kind of perspective. Go across the pubic bone and a little bit lateral here, and that is where your femur is, and your femur is 2 times the head size. So remember this head size here, just double it times 2, and that gives you this length. Okay, if it's a short person, then you shorten that, but that's that. Then this, double it down, it takes you down to the ground. Okay, then you have to know how to do this without any perspective first before you get out of perspective, because this great toe canter is where your wrist is, and then this is your little hand. Okay, so all this seems like, well, Ray seems to like really know what he's doing, but all this comes from just sheer practice and drawing stick people like this. And see, if I want to move the arm off like this, then you have to remember that this is the longest you could draw that part of the arm. This is the longest. This is the longest you could draw the femur. You could draw it shorter, as you know, from foreshortening, but you can't draw it any longer. So what you end up doing is you end up looking for the kite. I'm going to write this down with big old quotations, the kite of the body, okay? And see that some people's kites are actually more like this. Why? Because the nipples are lower. A lot of times it's females, okay? But you could still have that relationship. Oh, in this particular person, the hips are wider. Okay, so now all of a sudden it does look like a female. Do you see what I'm saying? This is female, this is male. I think that's going to help a lot.
Yeah, definitely. How would you translate this technique to like on-site figure drawing or just drawing people on the train?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to show you how I do it, because I do this a lot when I'm at coffee houses. You know, I'm like a stereotype. Every coffee house has to have one of me in it, right? And the writer, you know, there's always like the writer. And
Right.
always like,
Yeah.
what I do is I try to, like, I look across the room, right? And this is what I draw, I kid you not. Does it look like the person? No, but this is what I draw. Then I look to see, because see, the people are moving. That whether you're on the train or somebody's having coffee, you're not going to go up to them and say, can you hold that pose for 20 minutes because I'm trying to draw you. Can you not sip your coffee? So what you do is you look up, and this is what I see right off the bat. And then this is a symbol of the direction that their head is turning. And you can see that it's going away from us, for instance. Got it? And then you just put a little jawline like this. Okay, so you just put a little rudimentary head. Okay, whatever it is that's happening. Then what I do is I actually just look to see what the main frame of the body is doing, like this. Then I could say, it's like, well, and I use almost like straight, very simplistic lines, kind of like this. And then the other one's kind of like this, or they're like talking on the phone or something. But I use very simple lines. Then there's something over here, and of course that's like the table. Okay, and then there's something in the way here, and then there's something here, and there's something here. So what I try to do is I just try to get the gist of what the body is doing. Okay, the gist of it, almost like you're playing. This is what I want you to think of. I want you to think of Pictionary. Okay, if you've never played Pictionary, it's kind of like a timed game where you have to just jot down quick information, and you can't put too much information on there. And this is the gist of it, right? Because then I could look to see, okay, this is like some of the slight details. I'm going to see if I can get a really light, shadowy figure like this. Okay, so it's really light, so I draw things lightly. It's the shadows. Okay, bear with me, because this is a fabulous little thing that I do all the time. I get the gist of like what the face is doing like this. I don't care about like if they're wearing a hat or whatever. That is like next. Like let's say they are wearing a little hat. Then the hat goes over the object right there. Then I start rounding things off a little bit more, just to make them a little bit more accurate. And it's like, well, they're wearing sleeves, and then the arm comes out. But it's always best to think Pictionary first. Okay? And the other thing is, always remember that a lot of times people are wearing, you know, not just a white shirt, but they're wearing sleeves, or they're wearing a pattern, whatever. But see, you start with the really basic stuff, and if they're wearing shorts, and you do this, and before you know it, you start getting yourself an image. But you start with a simple first, and you'd be surprised how, like, if there's another person over here, you just kind of like, or, yeah, kind of like this, or their back is towards us. So you're going to see that it's abstracted. You abstract first. Look for the general, and then start putting the specifics, because you don't have enough time anyway. It's one of the best ways to learn how to draw anyway, draw better, is by just doing from life and without people knowing that you're drawing them. And just be really careful so you don't get punched in the nose by a boyfriend or anything like that. But I've learned to be really, really good. I just look up for a little tiny period, you know, and little by, do you see what I'm trying to tell you? Is that you keep it really simple first. And if you have like a Copic marker, I'm going to write that down because a lot of you might not know what that is. It's kind of like a grayscale marker. It would look kind of like this. Let's see if I can find something that's kind of like it. It would look like that. And you could quickly get, almost the way I'm doing now, quick little shadows and stuff. And I know this looks kind of silly, but what's neat about it is that you get the Pictionary version, and then with whatever time you might happen to have, you can actually add the details as it goes, because you don't know how long that person's going to stay in that position. But by using these markers, you could just do something quickly like this, and then put the details later, like that. And what's neat, just like right now I'm putting one layer on top of the other, the same thing happens with a marker. If you let it dry and then put a layer on, it gets darker. It's almost like a watercolor. I hope that helps, because it's one of my favorite things to do. Without you getting all uptight about, oh, I don't know anatomy, and then you start whining yourself out of like a good image. So instead of like saying what you can't do, it's like, you know what, I'm just going to pretend I'm playing Pictionary, and I'm timed, and you'd be surprised how much good information you could get by just almost not putting any details. What messes up your drawings are the little details. The fact that you're trying to draw what the person looks like is going to totally mess you up. Okay, so forget about all that. This doesn't even have to look all that great. I mean, I'm not self-conscious about this little silly drawing. It's like, oh, that Ray guy, he doesn't draw that well. It's like, I don't care. And when I just really don't care except have fun, then it's amazing how much better you draw, because you liberate yourself from that pressure of like, it always has to look good. Somebody's going to look at this. I'm going to be judged. And before you know it, it's like you're walking out on a ledge ready to jump, because it's like you can't be as good as things that you've seen. Things that get posted sometimes are not really very fair, because they could say it took them 2 minutes, but it probably didn't. So you have to just kind of not compare. But you can see the more detail I put into this, the more I bring out little details. Okay, so that if the person walks away and they're done with their coffee, you don't bring them back in and say, I'm sorry, I haven't finished drawing you yet. What you do is you have enough information where it's like, okay, this person has left, and I'm not doing a portrait of them, so who cares? And I just keep adding details as I go. All right?
Yeah, that's great. We're going to be coming to an end soon, so is there anything else you'd like to address, or any last questions? Okay, we have a question. What do you normally look in for a portfolio for art school?
Figure drawings. Let me tell you why. So many people nowadays work behind a computer, and even weak artists can look better behind a computer. So the easiest way to discern who is really good, because you can't hide, you can't take a piece of newsprint and have a model in front of you, and then you're drawing with a charcoal pencil. You can't fake that. You can't fake that. So the easiest way to determine how good an artist is how well do they draw. And that's always been true. When I looked at, if you ever see originals by Peter Paul Rubens or Leonardo or Michelangelo, it will make your knees weak, because it's like that kind of talent transcends centuries.
Yeah.
It's not like we've gotten to the point where we draw so much better that those guys look like hacks. In the contrary, they look even better to us now, because that kind of knowledge and that kind of draftsmanship is actually not as common as it used to be. So it's figure drawings. Whatever it is that you're going to be doing in art, part of your portfolio should have really good figure drawings from life. And that's my advice to anybody that comes to my classes. And that's also like the times I go and teach at or visit like over at Disney Feature Animation, for instance. A lot of times the animators will tell me, say, yeah, make sure that you keep reinforcing that knowledge in them, because people bring in these portfolios and they're full of like things that they've done on the computer, and it doesn't show that they have any talent, just that they know how to work their computer, and a lot of people know how to do that now. So figure drawings it really show where you're at, and it's also a good indicator as to how well you're doing.
Okay, we have one last question. Why are photographs considered to be a mediocre approach by traditional artists?
And you're talking about how as reference?
Let's see. Just give it a second. They're probably responding. Just in general? So I guess.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Let me think about what the person may mean, because maybe because photography in itself is an art, and I'm not a photographer, but great photographers know what they're doing, and they could take pictures of bodies there. It's gorgeous. It's very sculptural, and they say a lot. And, you know, Ansel Adams and his photography, black and white photography, nature photography, is a high art form. But when it comes to reference, I tell my students not to use photographic reference oftentimes, because you learn more from seeing how other artists actually created the forms. So in that sense, you know, great photography is all about lighting and aperture and the subject matter and what you want to say with it, you know, because it could be a photojournalist, you know, showing how hard somebody's life is, or something like that. So I'm not sure exactly what they mean, but, you know, photography is an art on itself. Using too many photographs with Photoshop and stuff like that, it just really diminishes your art, because you're using a different medium, unless you're really good at it. But that was a hard one to answer, because I would need maybe a little bit more information, but maybe that the way I answered that might help.
Yeah, they clarified why is it recommended to draw from life as compared to drawing from photographs?
Oh, yeah, okay, that one's easy too, because a lot of times the photograph-wise, there's slight distortions. If you trace over a photograph, sometimes you'll see it's like, oh, the proportions are funky. I've even seen, like, some of my students, I tell them to be careful when they use reference that's sculptural, because I've seen photographs of Michelangelo's David, and it looks like David's had way too many hamburgers. You know, he's all flat and chubby. And I know for a fact that, you know, he hasn't changed in the last 500 years. So it's a photograph. And also, you know, photography, what happens is if you use reference like photography, you're basically a slave to the shading that they or the lighting or lack of lighting. So you could get away with bad lighting, not bad lighting, but like under lighting or over lighting or whatever in photography, because you're trying to say something. Like a photograph of Miles Davis, for instance, you know, could be very harsh because he's a jazz musician. You want to show that and the smokiness of the room or whatever. But usually I tell my students to use art because, see, it's already been done by an artist that is very masterful at form development. So that's what you're trying to do. So it's easier for you to copy something that you're doing rather than, you know, something that is a different art form in itself. That should make sense to you.
Alrighty, Ray. Well, it was a pleasure to have you for this hour.
I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, and be sure to check out Ray's class. And yeah, that's it for today. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Ray.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care. Have a good one.